As AI, as tech speeds things up, how do we keep the human in human resources?
Yeah, so this is a question that I talk with all my clients about, not even just with human resource related topics. I mean, this is kind of the big balancing act that everybody is working through these days, and that being when do the tools provide so much automation, so much speed, benefit, everything like that. It's really easy for us to want to continue to lean heavier and heavier on these tools. But that is exactly what they are. Like any tool, it is to help you perform your job. It is not doing the actual job for you. So the biggest thing to remember when we're talking about AI automation and keeping the human element is just to make sure that, especially as we're going on and automating processes, people were talking about wanting onboarding processes to be, more expedient and more automated and everything. And that's great. But part of the process of you incorporating that into your organization, before you put in the tools, you need to have a discussion about where we are going to keep people involved in this process. And that's something that's really important to critically think about before you just start slapping these systems on. I advocate for every single business that I work with that the first thing that you all should be doing is to be developing artificial intelligence policies for your organization. And that does multiple things. Number one, it gives you a roadmap so that when you're going to implement something into a critical business function, you have documented information about how your organization has discussed incorporating these new technologies. The other big thing, and I'm sure that this will be part of a question that's coming up here, is transparency. And that is transparency to me is the easiest way to get over this fear because if people understand not only how these systems are going to be used within their days and their workflows and everything, but if they have more of an understanding about the type of information that's being fed into them, the type of information they should expect to come out, and where their involvement will be in either reviewing that information or whatever that looks like, having that transparency, I again advocate for everybody. I think that's one of the most important parts as we kind of people start to invest more time and resources into these types of efforts.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. I think that people forget that it takes a human to feed the AI tool, right? It takes us to actually tell the AI to put the parameters in place, tell it what we need, adjust what it gives us back. And so I personally think the human will never go away, right? It will make things a little bit, I think, more efficient, but a human is needed to make AI work properly. So I
So yeah, so I mean, I'm a programmer. That's
Mhm.
that's my main skill set here.
Mhm.
Writing computer applications is like building a house. There are a lot of individual components, and if you think about your house, think about all the the standardized boards that set up, the walls before there's drywall on them, and all those kinds of things. There's a lot of automation, and obviously in how those things are manufactured, but it's not like we're asking somebody to just build an entire house, or especially if you're doing custom construction or something like that. There needs to be that someone needs to be able to see the whole picture. And as good as these AI systems are, I can speak from experience that trying to use them to do those types of large scale projects is still a work in progress. And so you need to be able to critically think about individual aspects of your workflows and how these systems are working within those, as opposed to just adopting an entire new way of doing things because we've got some shiny new tools. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you brought up a point when you were talking about kind of the human aspect. So what role does empathy play when employees are engaging with these digital HR systems?
So obviously, the first thing is that computers, despite what you may have heard or read, these AI systems are not actually, they're not actually reading your emotions. They don't really understand the stuff. I would advocate for everybody to go out and it's quite technical and boring, but to learn a little bit about how these systems actually work and how they turned your language into ways that computers can read them, because computers do not understand language. So you have to understand that first. When we're talking about human empathy, which is obviously not something that can truly be replicated by a machine. However, when we talk about things like HR assistant chatbots or something like that, we have our employee handbooks and other policies in place that we're using as knowledge for these chatbots to answer questions for us. That's a pretty common use case in this industry.
Right.
Um, those chatbots themselves, or frankly, any of these language interpreting models, they can be set up to use more empathetic language, if nothing else. I'm sure everyone here has at least probably heard the term of sentiment analysis before. That's another way that we can incorporate empathy into these computer systems, where these systems can be taught to evaluate language for the if anyone hasn't heard that term sentiment analysis, broadly, it is how positive or negative is the language that I'm reviewing here. And these systems can be set up so that if they are detecting negative language or whatever that may be, whether it's interpersonal or even someone just interacting with this chatbot, but it's really negative sounding language. They sound really bad on their job, their morale is low, whatever that may be, those are things that these systems can flag and point in the direction of a human. So, empathy, the way that these can help with empathy in the workplace, I think is more of a detection process than it is trying to slap them on and, for lack of a better way of putting it, being your workplace therapist. Please don't use these like that. That's not what they should be used for. But as HR professionals, you can have systems in place that will flag the type of language that then you can help to address, because ultimately, for a lot of people, I'm sure that is your role at your
Right,
organization.
right,
So,
absolutely. So while we're talking to Jake, can you please, if you have any questions, I know AI is a hot topic and many people have questions surrounding it, so you can add questions in the chat. I just want to add something to what you just said, Jake, about empathy. So yes, I think it's crucial to add empathy or make sure the system is set up to have those parameters. But I also think it's important. I'm a sociologist by nature, right? So I always think of the people. I also think it's important to understand that this change will not be accepted the same by everybody, right? So
sure.
we have to show empathy in how we roll it out. We have to communicate as much as possible and ensure everyone is trained and comfortable with using it before we make it a mandate, right? So some people will be more resistant than others to using AI for various reasons, right? Aside from the reason that they think it may eliminate their position, but also it may be comfortability. It also may be confidentiality, all the things that you talked about in that mentee. But we definitely have to make sure that we understand that it's a change and people approach change differently and show empathy as we roll it out into our organization. So I think that's another thing to think about as well as
And transparency goes a long way toward that.
absolutely,
Transparency in your policies, how it's going to be used, acknowledgement for your staff about
absolutely,
you understand the impact that this may have on your job, and communicating that to people to make sure that we all understand that the intent here is not to replace people's jobs. I often say to my clients, these are tools that are supposed to help you go from busy to productive. We are
right.
trying to get rid of all that busyness and make us more productive, which means we're trying to get rid of all the screening we have to do that can be done pretty well by a machine. But that just what that should enable you is to spend more time making sure that you're exhibiting empathy toward your employees, or that you're empathetic to their needs and everything, or their worries about such a drastic change in their in their day-to-day work life.
Absolutely, absolutely. So while you were talking the first time, it came in my head when you were talking about the technical aspect, and I kind of want to talk about the ethical. What
Sure.
ethical red flags should HR leaders watch for when adopting AI into their organization?
Yeah, hopefully one that most people are aware of and are worrying about is bias. These systems, and this is another reason why I'm always a proponent of people understanding how these systems work. Because when you understand the data that they are trained on and how they're forming their responses, it's very easy to connect the dots and understand why the responses that you're getting, if you are not careful, can be very biased because of the data that they've been trained on. It's not like this is purposeful, but this is just inherent in the way, there are certain types of jobs that certain demographics or even just certain genders focus on. I mean, there was this case study that I was reading about Amazon Web Services that admittedly most software engineers that work there are male. And so when they were going through their hiring process, they found that because of the information that was helping to judge the applicants to positions, because all the previous holders of those applications were predominantly male, the screening process was very drastically skewed to favor male applicants. And that is just kind of an example of how this can happen. Um, it's not because a person is sitting there saying, we want a certain type of person. These AI systems are trained on a specific type of data, and they have to themselves be trained or instructed on. I actually just see something pop in the chat about
Mhm,
this, that
mhm.
they need to be set up and trained and instructed in a way that can help to remove those biases, or or you really need to be thinking about their training data and what they're basing their responses on. And if you understand that, it becomes a lot easier to kind of mitigate those risks.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And Jelani just said in the chat, you have to train your AI tool to be a version of you, right? So that's still, it answers kind of both questions, that human aspect that we want to keep in human resources, as well as that ethical and inclusive mindset that we want to make sure that we are putting ourselves and what we need and asking the right questions and formatting it in a way that we are ensuring it thinks like us, right?
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
I use Chat GPT and I've named my Chat GPT Lexi Chat. That's her name. So she's definitely an extension of me. I have one more question for
Sure.
you that I kind of want to get your feedback on. So in performance management, of course, in recruiting, in HR, we are already using AI quite a bit, but also in performance management. So what risk do you see if we rely too heavily on AI and performance management?
Yeah, I mean, this all to me, this all still, especially for this industry, all comes back to just keeping in that human element to this. I mean, it is, think about something like performance reviews. If those are happening in some kind of automated fashion using artificial intelligence, um, the data that whatever systems you're using to capture, how they're performing, the metrics that they're meeting, or anything like that, that data is obviously valuable. I mean, we want to be objective with this stuff when we can, especially when we're talking about employee performance. However, we all understand that think back to when you were in high school taking your SATs or something like that. You could be a really good straight A student and everything and just not perform well on your SATs because you're not a good test taker. AI is not necessarily going to make that type of distinguishment between someone who, there could be someone who scores really well in their SATs and is really high performing academically, but would not be a particularly effective employee at your business. Whereas there may be someone who, only has a college degree, but is a super hard worker and is a great team member and all those things. It's harder for AI to make those kinds of judgments. If you have data that you can relate to that, it certainly helps. But that's one of the first things that I always think about is over reliance on data and assuming that these things are going to be able to correlate what we consider your KPIs or performance metrics, but that doesn't tell the whole story about people. A lot of people is how do they work within this team? Are they, maybe this person isn't the great at day-to-day performance, but they are an amazing idea generator. And when you have them in your brainstorming sessions, they just knock it out of the park but they're never going to produce as much of a product or something, whatever that may be, as the next person sitting next to them. Neither one of those things is necessarily more valuable than the other one. So again, this is why I always say critically thinking about how these implementations of AI are going to work is crucial to doing this before you're slapping something on there. And then all of a sudden you're backtracking and having to, dig back in and realize why these, why our performance judging or why that person got fired because they didn't meet the metrics, even though they were everyone's favorite coworker.
Mhm, mhm, mhm.
So
Absolutely. So thank you, Jake. I
yeah,
appreciate it. I want to ask you and the participants here, can you please use the chat? This is just a personal question that
sure.
someone asked me not too long ago. How do you feel about people who have used AI on their applications or on their responses to some of your knockout questions? What is your approach? Are you okay with them using AI or are you not okay with them using AI? Because
So
that
yeah.
came up.
So I'm going to be perfectly honest. I use AI to help me with every single client deliverable that I have right now. It is a my distinguishment here is what is the value that you're trying to provide and honing in on what it actually is that allows you to provide that value. So if you're doing things, so someone like using AI to maybe adapt a resume specifically to a job description or something like that, absolutely no problem here. My mindset is if we're going to be using these things to screen applicants, using these systems to screen applicants, why would we not let the applicants use it to try and, it just seems pretty fair to me to allow that to happen. That's not always the case, though. One of the nonprofits that I work with here, we give out these micro grants to graduating high school students every year. And we had like 150 students apply for what eventually gave out about 30 grants. Um, we talked about whether or not we should use AI to screen what was essentially like an RFP or, kind of thing,
Mhm.
application process and screening their applications against the requirements of this. And ultimately, we decided we're not going to do that because it seems a little unfair to these high school students to judge them. Some of them may have used AI and might be written perfectly, but maybe the other person's who isn't written as well actually has a better story about why they should be getting this. And just because applicant A used a system to match exactly to the requirements doesn't necessarily actually mean that the content of that is any better than the person who didn't. So human element, it's you gotta these are all the kind of considerations, and those are the type discussions that I would like to see everyone having is where do we draw the line between we've got to process 100 of these applications and we've got to do it fast versus what's the gap then if we just automate that entire thing and don't have humans judging this at all? Who's going to be left behind, basically?
Right, right. I agree. We have to have the conversations. AI is here.
It
And
is,
so we
it's not
have to
going
be
away.
prepared, right?
Yeah.
We have to be prepared. I personally think it's okay for people to use AI because I also think it's important for AI to sound as much like you as possible. But I have worked with some organizations who are completely against it. And if they can tell you've used AI, you are knocked out. And so I definitely think that people think differently. And so we have to be open to those different viewpoints. But Jake, thank you, thank you, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate your expertise and you answering our questions. You enjoy the remainder of your day. And if you can stay on, please do. Thank you.
And thank you so much for including me. Thank you everybody for listening. And I do have to hop a little early, but I am going to drop my contact info and like Calendly link in there if anybody wants
Please
to book more
do.
time to talk or something. I'm always happy to talk about this stuff. So thanks everybody.